My parents gave my golden child sister the house I paid to renovate, then asked to borrow my car because hers had squeaky brakes. They didn't know I'd already frozen the deed and filed a six-figure lien against their property. The cream-colored envelope felt heavier than it looked. The kind of expensive, linen-finished stationery that usually signals either a wedding invitation or a legal death sentence. My name, Owen, was typed in a sterile, 12-point serif font that felt colder than any handwritten note from my mother ever could. I'm an IT consultant. I deal with data, logic, and cold hard facts for a living. But as I stood in my parents' kitchen with the smell of mom's overboiled cabbage filling the air, my internal processors were redlining. I've spent the last 5 years being the ghost in their machine. I'm the guy who resets the router at 11 p.m., the guy who spends his Saturdays scrubbing mold out of their grout, and the guy who subsidized their golden years when their social security checks did a disappearing act. I didn't do it for a gold star or a trophy. I did it because that's what a son does. Or so I thought. My sister Melody, on the other hand, is a professional atmospheric disturbance. She's 31 going on 16, a human hurricane of manifesting and finding her tribe. After her vegan bakery in Austin went bust, a shock to absolutely no one, she drifted back to our hometown like a colorful autumn leaf landing in a puddle of gray slush. She's currently curating her brand from a friend's spare room, which is Reddit speak for being broke and bored. Yet, to my parents, she's a saint who just happens to have bad luck with trees and finances. I pulled the document out of the envelope. It wasn't a draft. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized. I skipped past the legal jargon, my eyes darting until I hit the distribution of assets. I expected a 50-50 split. Hell, I would have even swallowed a 60-40 split in her favor because she needs it more. But as I read the words, my stomach did a slow, sickening roll. The house, the 3-bedroom colonial I had personally re-shingled 2 summers ago, was going to Melody. The savings accounts, the modest life insurance policies, even the antique clock that I've been winding every Sunday for half a decade? All Melody. And then there was my name. To my son, Owen, I leave my gratitude for his years of service and the sum of $5,000 to assist with his continued professional endeavors. $5,000. That's roughly the cost of the industrial-grade HVAC system I paid for out of pocket last January so they wouldn't freeze to death. I wasn't an heir. I was a reimbursed contractor. I was the help that got a nice tip at the end of the shift. I looked over at my dad, snoring in his recliner. His thin, translucent skin looked so fragile under the floor lamp. I'd spent so much time protecting that fragility that I never realized he was using it as a shield to hide his true intentions. And Mom, humming a tuneless song in the kitchen, was the one who kept telling me Melody had changed. Changed how? Had she finally learned how to manipulate a notary? Owen, is that you, honey? Mom stepped into the dining area, wiping her hands on an apron that I'd bought her last Christmas. She saw the envelope in my hand. The color drained from her face faster than a crashed server. Mom, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a stranger 3 rooms away. What is this? Oh, Owen, you weren't… We were going to sit you down. We were going to explain, she stammered, her eyes darting toward the living room, as if hoping Dad would wake up and provide an exit strategy. Explain that I'm the service and she's the legacy? I felt a heat rising in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just anger, it was the sheer, suffocating realization that I had been played. I was the reliable, boring beta tester for a life they were gifting to their favorite child. You're so successful, Owen, she said, her voice turning into that high-pitched, pleading tone she used whenever Melody overcharged their credit cards. You have your career, you have your savings. Melody, she's a free spirit, she needs a soft landing. We just wanted to make sure she was taken care of. I've been taking care of you, I snapped, the volume of my voice finally waking my father. He blinked, squinting at me through the haze of a nap. What's the shouting for? He grumbled. The shouting, I said, holding up the cream-colored document like a piece of evidence in a murder trial, is because I just found out I've been paying the mortgage on Melody's future inheritance. Why didn't you just ask me to write her a check directly and save us all the theater? The room went silent, save for the ticking of the clock I had kept running. I looked at them. really looked at them, and realized they didn't feel guilty, they felt caught. In their minds, I was the pillar. You don't feed a pillar, you just lean on it until it cracks. I set the will down on the table right next to the bag of Honeycrisp apples they liked. My hands were shaking, but my mind was suddenly terrifyingly clear. The safety net was officially closing for maintenance. I think, I said, my voice dropping to a low, vibrating calm, that since Melody is so responsible now, and since she's the one inheriting the estate, she can be the one to drive you to the cardiologist on Tuesday. I have a professional endeavor I need to go work on. I turned for the door, the weight of 5 years of quiet service lifting off my shoulders and being replaced by a cold, hard stone of resentment that I knew wasn't going away anytime soon. I was done being the unofficial caretaker. If they wanted a golden child, they were about to find out exactly how much it cost to keep that gold from tarnishing. The realization didn't just hurt, it was a physical weight, a literal pressure in my chest that made every breath feel like I was inhaling broken glass. To my beloved daughter Melody, we leave the family home and all its contents. That was it. No mention of the son who spent his weekends power washing the siding. No nod to the guy who replaced the water heater in a flooded basement at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not even a thanks for the memories. Just a complete, systematic erasure of my existence from the family legacy. I stood there in that kitchen, the linoleum tile I'd personally waxed last month feeling cold beneath my boots. Mom was fluttering around in the background, her voice a muffled drone about pot roast and dinner rolls, but I was underwater. The white noise in my ears was deafening. They were gifting the entire kingdom to the girl who couldn't even be bothered to call on Father's Day, while I was being treated like a live-in super who didn't even merit a mention in the fine print. I didn't blow up. I didn't scream. I just felt this profound, icy detachment settle over me. I drove home in a trance, the streetlights blurring into long, jagged streaks of yellow. That night, I sat in my darkened apartment, staring at the wall until the sun started to crawl over the horizon. The anger wasn't a flash fire. It was a slow cooker, simmering on low, tenderizing my resolve until it turned into something hard and unyielding. I started the slow fade. I stopped being the proactive IT guy for their lives. No more, "Hey Dad, I saw the lawn was looking shaggy, so I mowed it." No more, "Mom, I noticed you were low on heart meds, so I swung by the pharmacy." I switched the weekly grocery hauls to bi-weekly, then stopped entirely, leaving the circulars on the counter with a polite, "Let me know if you need help navigating the delivery app." I stopped paying the utilities directly from my bank account. I started dropping the physical bills in their mailbox with a sticky note, just making sure this didn't get lost. For 3 weeks, they didn't even notice. Or if they did, they were too comfortable to care. Melody was playing her role to perfection, the reformed daughter. She'd post selfies with Mom, captioned with "Family is everything #blessed," while I was the one getting the frantic texts when the Wi-Fi went down. But I knew the golden child playbook. I knew that as soon as the luxury of my labor disappeared, she'd start sweating. Then 2 weeks ago, the dam finally broke. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a rapid-fire succession of texts from Mom that read like a digital panic attack. "Oh, and do you know when the electric bill is due?" They sent a final warning. "Also, the grocery store declined my card. Can you check the balance?" And then, the text that turned my blood to liquid nitrogen. "Melody said she thought you were still covering these things. She said you must have just forgotten because you've been so busy." I stared at the screen, a dark, cynical laugh escaping my throat. Melody wasn't just lazy, she was a strategist. She knew I'd seen that will. She was intentionally letting them feel the financial pinch, painting me as the forgetful, busy brother, while she played the sympathetic ear. She was waiting for me to cave and keep the lights on so her future inheritance didn't lose its value. I didn't reply. I watched the 3 little typing dots dance on the screen for 20 minutes as Mom typed, deleted, and retyped. Finally, a message came from Dad's phone. "No, how are you? No, we miss you." Just the raw, entitled demand. "We need $2,000 for rent and arrears, please." I stared at that $2,000 request. They wanted me to pay for the roof that they had already promised to give to my sister. They wanted me to subsidize her future assets while she sat on the couch, curating her brand. I sent back one word, "No," But before I sent that no, I had already put the wheels in motion. I wasn't going to just walk away and let Melody win the long game. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, I was going to start acting like a professional. The drive to the county records office was the longest 20 minutes of my life. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing through every repair, every invoice, and every cent I'd poured into that house. The building smelled like bureaucracy and despair, stale coffee and wet concrete. I wasn't there for a copy of the will. I was there for the deeds. I was there to see exactly how protected Melody really was. I'd called an old friend from law school, a guy who specialized in estate litigation and property liens. We had a very interesting conversation about unjust enrichment and sweat equity. If they wanted to give Melody the house, that was their right. But they were about to find out that the house came with a very, very expensive bill attached to it, and I was the one holding the invoice. The records office felt like a liminal space designed by a bored bureaucrat, a purgatory caught somewhere between a DMV and a waiting room from a 90s sitcom. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and old paper. The receptionist, a woman whose soul had clearly been crushed by 30 years of filing tax liens, didn't even look up from her monitor when I approached. I asked for the property deed and the recently filed will of Bill and Linda Miller. She pushed a tattered clipboard toward me with a rhythmic thud. "Sign here." "Need ID." I handed over my driver's license, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a stark contrast to the deathly silence of the hall. A few minutes later, I was clutching a manila folder on a faded vinyl chair that groaned under my weight. I opened it and the world stopped spinning. There it was. Not a draft, not a maybe, but a cold, hard legal reality. The official deed transfer was already pending, scheduled to move into Melody's name within 90 days. The will had been notarized just last month. No split. No, to my son, Owen, for his years of devotion. Nothing. It was a total handover of the family kingdom to the girl who had spent the last decade treating our parents like an inconvenient ATM. I drove home in a vacuum. No radio, no podcasts, no GPS, just the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the deafening roar of my own thoughts. This wasn't about the equity or the square footage. It was about the betrayal of the safety net. I was the one who crawled under the house to fix the plumbing.
Wait until you hear what happens next. But before we get to the most insane part of the story, make sure to subscribe to Reddit Echo and hit the bell icon. You don't want to miss the updates on this one. Let's get back to it.
I was the one who skipped dates and vacations to make sure their property taxes were caught up. All of it, the sweat, the stress, the thousands of dollars, meant zero compared to Melody batting her eyelashes and pretending to have a soul-searching epiphany for 3 weeks. I decided to run one final diagnostic before I pulled the plug. I went to their house that weekend, playing the part of the dutiful son one last time. Mom greeted me with a tight, nervous smile that didn't even graze her eyes. Melody was the picture of unearned luxury, sprawled across the sofa I had paid to have steam cleaned, sipping a $9 kombucha and flicking through TikTok. Dad was a vegetable in his recliner, the remote resting on his gut like a scepter. "Hey," I said, dropping a heavy bag of groceries on the counter. "Thought I'd bring some essentials." Mom fluttered over, looking guilty. "Oh, Owen, you didn't have to, sweetheart. Melody said she was taking care of the shopping this week." I looked over at the couch. My sister didn't even glance up from her screen. "Did she now?" Melody gave a lazy, feline shrug. "I was going to, but Whole Foods was a total disaster. They were out of, everything I actually eat. It's been such a stressful week, honestly." "Right," I said, my voice dripping with a sarcasm they were too blind to notice. "Well, the normal grocery store has bread and milk, just in case anyone was worried about starving." Melody just chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "You're such a martyr, Owen. It's actually kind of adorable." I left before the martyr in me decided to flip the kitchen table. Something inside my chest was cracking, the tectonic plates of my patience finally shifting into a full-blown earthquake. The final straw didn't just break the camel's back, it pulverized it. Friday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dad. "Hey, Owen," he started, his voice gravelly and hesitant. "Got a favor to ask, a big one." "What's up, Dad?" "Well, your sister's been working so hard lately. Really putting in the effort to help us get organized, you know? She's been a real trooper. I felt a literal twitch in my eyelid. Organized? She was organizing my inheritance into her pocket. Anyway, we were thinking she needs a little break, some independence to get back on her feet. Okay. We were wondering if you could give her your car for a bit, just for a few weeks. She's been driving my old Buick, but the brakes are squeaky and it's not really safe for her. You work from home, right? You don't really need to go anywhere. I went numb. You want me to give her my car? The car I paid off last year? Not give, just lend, temporarily. She's got job interviews, errands. She needs to look professional, Owen. Plus, she doesn't even have her local license yet, so she needs something reliable while she figures that out. She doesn't have a license, Dad, I said, my voice dangerously level. And you want me to hand over a $30,000 asset so she can float around town for job interviews that don't exist? You want me to be a prisoner in my own apartment so the golden child can have a fresh ride? Don't be like that, he sighed, sounding disappointed. We're a family. We help each other. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just hit the red button and ended the call. The illusion was gone. I wasn't the reliable son. I was a piece of communal property. I was a utility bill that they expected to pay itself. An hour later, my phone chimed. A text from Melody. Sorry if Dad caught you off guard. I told him you might be weird about the car. Honestly, Owen, you have so much and I have so little right now. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? Just drop the keys off tomorrow when you bring the Saturday bagels. Love ya. I stared at the love ya and felt a cold, sharp grin spread across my face. She wanted to play the we have so much game? Fine. It was time to show her exactly how much of ours was actually mine. Let me know when I can pick up the keys. I stared at the screen until the light dimmed and the display timed out, leaving me sitting in the dark. That single sentence from Melody was the absolute summit of audacity. She wasn't just asking for my car, she was demanding it as if it were a pre-packaged part of her inheritance package. No please, no would you mind, just the cold, entitlement-drenched command of a girl who had spent her entire life being told that the world was her oyster and I was the shucking knife. I didn't reply. Not because I was stunned, but because I was busy. I opened my laptop and felt a strange, cold surgical precision take over. I logged into the shared grocery delivery account and the one I'd funded for the last 5 years, and deleted my primary credit card. Click. I called the local pharmacy and spoke to the tech. Yes, this is Owen. I'm moving my father's prescriptions to the branch near my office. No, don't worry about the delivery service. I'll be handling it personally from now on. Click. I logged into the utility portals for their address, the electricity, the water, the high-speed fiber internet I'd installed so they could watch their shows, and toggled every single autopay switch to the off position. Finally, I pulled up Melody's contact. I didn't block her out of a temper tantrum. I blocked her because she was a system error I no longer had the patience to debug. I needed the silence to be absolute while I finished my work. Over the next 14 days, the silence on her end was replaced by a digital meltdown from my mother. It started with confusion. Owen, honey, the grocery app says there's no payment method. Did you get a new card? 3 days later, it turned into worry. Sweetheart, the electric company sent a pink notice. I tried to call you, but it went to voicemail. Is everything okay? Then finally, the mask of everything is fine was ripped off. The text that hit my phone was pure, unadulterated desperation. We need $2,000 for rent. Please, Owen. Rent. I froze at that word. Rent? They've owned that colonial for 30 years. My grandfather built the back deck. What on earth were they talking about? I did a quick deep dive into the documents I'd pulled from the county office. That's when I saw it. A reverse mortgage. Filed 18 months ago, right around the time Melody's vegan bakery in Austin went belly up. They'd cashed out the equity to fund her failures, and now the bank was the one holding the keys. Melody hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She had already spent it. The silence must have finally terrified them because the safety net wasn't catching them anymore. They didn't text. They showed up. I was in the middle of searing a steak when the pounding started on my apartment door. I didn't even check the peephole. I knew the rhythm. When I swung the door open, the sight was a Renaissance painting of middle-class collapse. My mother looked 10 years older, her makeup smudged and her hair pulled into a frantic, messy knot. Dad was leaning heavily on his cane, his face a map of exhaustion. And then there was Melody. She stood behind them like a ghost haunting my doorstep, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a smug, tiny half-smile. She looked like she was waiting for a camera crew to yell, "Cut!" so she could go back to her kombucha. "Owen," Mom said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." I didn't say a word, I just stepped back holding the door open. They filed in like a funeral procession. Melody made herself at home instantly, plopping onto my mid-century modern sofa and crossing her legs as if she were the guest of honor at a gala. I stayed by the kitchen island, arms folded, my face a mask of IT professional neutrality. "Well," I said. Mom cleared her throat, her hands wringing her purse. "We've hit a bit of a financial snag. The bank, they're being very difficult about the monthly payments. We know you've always been the one we could rely on, Owen. We were hoping—" "No," I said. She blinked, her mouth hanging open. "I haven't even finished." "You want money," I said, my voice as flat as a dead battery. "You want me to cover the reverse mortgage payments for a house you've already signed over to Melody. You want me to buy the groceries, pay the light bill, and keep the Wi-Fi running so Melody can scroll Instagram in a house I'm no longer allowed to own." The answer is no. Dad's jaw tightened, his knuckles white on the head of his cane. "Don't be like this, Owen. We're family. This is your sister." "Family?" I repeated the word like it was a foreign language. "Is that what we are? Because the county records say I'm a stranger. You gave away the house behind my back, you treated me like the hired help for 5 years, and then handed the company to the person who didn't even show up for the shift." "It's not like that," Mom cried, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "It is exactly like that. You filed the will, you initiated the deed transfer, you made a choice to trust the free spirit over the son who was actually there. You chose your legacy. Now you get to fund it." Melody scoffed from the couch, finally removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes full of annoyance. "God, Owen, it's just a house. Stop being so dramatic. You're successful. You have plenty of money. Why are you being so greedy?" I turned to her, and for the first time she saw the sheer cold fire in my eyes. "It's not about the house, Melody. It's about the principle. It's about every Saturday I spent fixing their roof while you were off finding yourself. It's about every cent I put into their bank account while you were draining it. You want the house? Fine, it's yours. Along with the debt, the taxes, and the $2,000 monthly payment to the bank. Enjoy your inheritance." Mom stepped forward, her voice a broken whisper. "We made a mistake, Owen, please. We need you." I looked at her, and I felt it. The click. That moment where the emotional tether finally snaps and you realize you don't owe anyone anything. "You already chose who you trust," I said quietly. "Now you have to live with her." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the floorboards. Dad's face went from angry to defeated in a heartbeat. Melody stood up, smoothing her dress with a bored sigh. "Come on," she said to them. "This was a total waste of time. He's clearly having some kind of breakdown." She led them out of my apartment without a single backward glance. No apology, no, "I'm sorry we hurt you." Just the rustle of her silk skirt and the heavy thud of my door closing. I stood there for a long time, the smell of my burnt steak filling the kitchen. I wasn't sad. I felt light. The next morning, I sent the formal reply to the rent request. No, but that wasn't the end. See, when I was at the county office, I didn't just find the deed transfer. I found a tiny, overlooked clause buried in the fine print of that reverse mortgage. Because the house was technically under a transfer-on-death deed to Melody, while still carrying a massive lien, she hadn't just inherited a home. She had inherited a legal nightmare that triggered an immediate due-on-sale clause the moment the deed transfer was finalized. Melody thinks she's getting a mansion. She doesn't realize she's actually inheriting a 6-figure debt that she has exactly 30 days to pay off, or the bank takes everything. And since she blocked me, I think I'll let her find that out when the eviction notice hits the door I used to paint for free. Would you like to know what happened when the 30 days ran out? The silence that followed their departure wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind I'd grown used to. It didn't feel like the prelude to a storm or the quiet before a lecture. It felt like a vacuum seal had been broken. For the first 2 weeks, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. The frantic 2 a.m., mom's in the ER text, which usually meant she had a mild headache and wanted attention. Or the dad's heater broke call that really meant, we want you to buy us a new one. But the notifications never came. My phone sat on my nightstand, a silent slab of glass and aluminum, and for the first time in a decade, it wasn't an instrument of my own emotional torture. The queen of entitlement, Melody, had clearly realized that her usual brand of peace and love manipulation wasn't going to work on a guy who had just looked her in the eye and told her to enjoy her debt. She probably thought she was punishing me with her absence, not realizing she was giving me the greatest gift I'd ever received. In that silence, I started to hear a voice I hadn't listened to since I was 21. My own. When you're a professional caretaker, the reliable one, the logical one, the safety net, you stop being a person and start being a utility. You're the Wi-Fi. People only notice you when you stop working. I'd been running on empty for 5 years, scraping the bottom of my emotional tank just to keep their lives polished while mine gathered dust in a one-bedroom apartment. I realized I'd been addicted to the scraps of validation they threw me, like a dog happy to get a pat on the head after being kicked. The rock bottom I hit wasn't financial. It was the realization that I had become a ghost in my own life. I'd wake up and stare at the popcorn ceiling, wondering who Owen actually was outside of the son who pays for things. I decided it was time for a total system reboot. I started small. I stopped eating lukewarm leftovers over my sink. I took myself to a bistro downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wear linen and the menu doesn't have pictures. I sat by the window, ordered a glass of wine that cost more than my first phone, and just existed. I didn't check my bank app. I didn't worry if mom was mad. I just tasted the food. It felt illegal, and then it felt like oxygen. I purged my life. I deep cleaned my apartment until the air smelled like citrus and new beginnings. I bought a high-end ergonomic desk chair that felt like a hug for my spine. A luxury I denied myself while I was busy paying for Melody's career pivots. I looked at my savings and realized that without the $800 a month drain of my parents' lifestyle, I was actually doing incredibly well. I signed up for therapy. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman who saw through my "it's fine" defense mechanism in 10 minutes, helped me unpack the layers of toxic obligation I'd been wearing like a lead suit. I cried. I shouted at a Zoom screen. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night without grinding my teeth. Then I did the unthinkable. I took a vacation. No checking in, no emergency contact listed as mom and dad. I bought a one-way ticket to the coast and spent 5 days hiking through redwood forests and sitting on fog-drenched beaches. I met the 19-year-old version of myself there, the one who had dreams of traveling and living for himself before he got sucked into the family vortex. I told him I was sorry. I told him we were back. By the time I touched down at home, the transformation was permanent. I was the asshole in the family group chat, from which I was now effectively exiled, and I'd never felt more liberated. I picked up 2 new high-tier AITA clients, worked with a focused intensity that earned me a massive retention bonus, and watched my bank account swell. I started saying no to everything that didn't serve my peace. No, I can't do a weekend call. No, I'm not attending that meeting without an agenda. My therapist called it self-reclamation. I called it turning the firewall on. But even in this new state of zen, there was a jagged little piece of data stuck in the back of my mind. It was that loose tooth you can't stop poking with your tongue. I kept thinking back to that rainy afternoon at the county records office. Most people see a deed transfer and see a house. I'm a consultant. I see a contract. And buried deep in the fine print of the Miller family estate transfer, beneath the flowery language of love and affection, was a specific, technical clause that Melody's free spirit brain would never have the capacity to understand. The document stated that the transfer was subject to lien clearance and familial equity reconciliation. In layman's terms, the transfer wasn't valid unless all outstanding debts against the property were settled, and any party who could prove substantial sweat equity investment in the property had been compensated or had signed a waiver of interest. I looked at the stack of folders on my new desk. 5 years of invoices for roof repairs, plumbing overhauls, HVAC installations, and property tax payments, all paid from my personal account. I had the receipts. I had the photos. I had the proof of every cent I'd spent reconciling the value of that house. Melody didn't just inherit a house with a reverse mortgage. She inherited a house that I technically held a massive, unwaived equitable lien against. She was currently sitting in a living room that, according to the law of equity reconciliation, partially belonged to the brother she had just tried to scam. I took a long sip of my coffee and pulled up my lawyer friend's number. It was time to stop being the safety net and start being the debt collector. If Melody wanted the house so badly, she was about to find out exactly what it feels like to pay for it. In full, plus interest. The legal jargon on the screen felt like a foreign language, until Samir, my old college roommate, who'd climbed the ranks of real estate law, began to translate. I'd emailed him the scans of the deed and the reverse mortgage papers with trembling hands. When my phone buzzed with his call, his voice was the first thing that had sounded like solid ground in weeks. "Owen, man, I've seen this specific familial equity reconciliation clause before," Samir said, his tone switching from old friend warmth to sharp professional focus. "It's a safeguard. It means the property isn't a clean gift yet. If you've been the one pouring money into that foundation, you aren't just a bystander, you're an unregistered stakeholder. If you have the paper trail for the renovations and the upkeep, you can throw a massive wrench in this entire transfer." My heart began to thud against my ribs, a heavy rhythmic percussion. "A wrench? Like, I can stop it?" "You can freeze it in its tracks," Samir replied. "You can contest the transfer, demand a buyout, or force a reconciliation of every cent you've spent to keep that roof from collapsing. Basically, you can block Melody from ever fully owning it until she pays you back for every nail and shingle." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity settle over me. This wasn't about the money anymore. I was doing fine in my IT bubble. This was about the principle. This was about the 5 years I'd spent being the invisible scaffolding, holding up my parents' lives while Melody was off chasing spiritual alignments on someone else's dime. I spent the next 3 weekends in IT audit mode. I turned my dining table into a war room. I combed through 5 years of digital bank statements, dusty folders of physical invoices, and archived emails. I found the $12,000 receipt for the HVAC system. I found the $4,000 for the plumbing disaster of 2022. I found every single grocery delivery confirmation and utility payment. I'd always been the just-in-case type of guy, the one who backs up his backups. And now, my obsessive record-keeping was about to become Melody's worst nightmare. Samir guided me through the letter of formal intent. It wasn't a full-blown lawsuit, not yet. It was a legal shot across the bow, a declaration filed with the county that I was contesting the deed transfer due to unacknowledged contributions. The moment that paper hit the clerk's desk, the deed was flagged. It was pending dispute. Effectively, the house was in legal purgatory. I sat with that envelope for 2 days before mailing it. I needed to make sure I wasn't just being a bitter brother on a revenge quest. But as I stared at the stamps, I realized this was the only way to get closure. I didn't want the house. I didn't want them to be homeless. I just wanted them to acknowledge that I existed. I wanted the world to see that I wasn't just a wallet with a heartbeat. I was the person who had kept them afloat while they were busy worshiping a golden idol that didn't even live in the same time zone. When I finally heard the clink of the mailbox lid, I felt like I'd shed 50 pounds of lead. I thought that was the end of the chapter. But Melody, true to form, couldn't just sit still. 3 days later, I was scrolling through my feed when a tag from an old high school neighbor popped up. My stomach did a slow, nauseating somersault. It was a photo of my parents' house, but it looked different. The shutters were painted a trendy, fixer-upper charcoal. The overgrown bushes I'd been meaning to trim were gone. The caption read, "Can't believe the Millers are finally listing. Such a beautiful home. I'm going to miss them." My blood went cold. They weren't just moving Melody in, they were trying to liquidate the asset before I could do anything about it. Melody was trying to flip my parents' house and vanish with the cash before the service son realized what was happening. I didn't comment. I didn't reach out to the family group chat. I just stared at the screen. The arrogance was staggering. She actually thought she could sell a property that was currently flagged in a legal dispute. She thought my silence was a sign of weakness rather than a sign of preparation. The official listing went live 48 hours later. It was all over the local real estate sites. Charming family home, lovingly maintained, recently updated. They even had a wide-angle lens shot of the backyard that made the patch of grass I'd mowed 1,000 times look like a sprawling estate. At the bottom, it said, "Contact Melody for a private showing." I was sitting at my desk, a fork full of cold pasta halfway to my mouth, when a screenshot arrived from a former classmate. "Your folks moving? Thought you'd be the one handling the sale, Owen. Hope everything is cool." I set the fork down. The pasta tasted like ash. Melody wasn't just being lazy anymore, she was being predatory. She was trying to profit off the years of labor I'd invested, hoping to close a sale and run before the county office's slow-moving bureaucracy caught up with her. She had no idea that I'd already pulled the pin on the grenade sitting under her private showing. She thought she was playing checkers, but I'd already hacked the board. I picked up the phone and dialed Samir. "She listed it," I said, my voice eerily calm. "She did what?" Samir sounded genuinely impressed by the stupidity. "She can't find a title insurance company in the country that will touch that sale with a pending dispute on the deed. She's literally trying to sell a house she doesn't legally own yet." "Let her try," I said. "I want her to get right to the edge of the closing table. I want her to think she's got the check in her hand, and then I want the bank to tell her why it's not happening." "Owen," Samir said, a hint of a laugh in his voice, "this is going to be absolutely nuclear." "Good," I replied. "I've spent 5 years being the fire extinguisher. It's about time I let something burn." "She's listing the house, Samir," I barked into the phone, pacing my living room like a caged animal. My footsteps echoed against the hardwood, the same hardwood I'd refinished 3 years ago while my father watched from his recliner, and Melody was off finding her center in a yurt. It's on every platform. Zillow, Redfin, the works. She's staging open houses. She's acting like the ink is dry on a deal that isn't even legal. Samir didn't even skip a beat. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of his keyboard on the other end. "Relax, Owen. Did the county clerk send the confirmation of the list pendants yet?" "Not yet," I admitted, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "They will. The dispute filing is active. The second a title company runs a preliminary report for a potential buyer, which they have to do before escrow, the flag will pop up like a neon sign. It freezes the entire gears of the machine. And the best part?" Samir paused for dramatic effect. "She has absolutely no idea." I sank onto my couch, the leather creaking under me. A cold, dark sense of satisfaction began to bloom in my chest. Good, let her dance. But good wasn't enough. Not after the years of being the family's invisible ATM. Not after being told I didn't need a car I'd paid for because I worked from home. I was done reacting. For the first time in my life, I was the one holding the remote, and I was about to change the channel on Melody's entire fantasy empire. To make this truly unforgettable, I needed to understand her endgame. Melody had always been a main character who was remarkably bad at covering her tracks. To her, privacy was just missed marketing. I created a burner Instagram profile, at West Coast Vibes 92, and followed her business account. I hit pay dirt instantly. She was already treating the house like a lottery win. She'd posted a reel of her clinking champagne glasses with a guy in a suit, captioned, "Exciting things ahead, saying goodbye to the past to make room for new, higher vibration chapters. DM if you're looking for a turnkey property with soul." The next day, she posted a selfie in the foyer where I'd spent 6 hours fixing the crown molding after a leak. "Open house this weekend. Manifesting high-energy offers for the next lucky stewards of this home. Hashtag real estate, hashtag manifestation, hashtag new beginnings." I scrolled through the comments, my jaw tightening. It was a swamp of enablers. "So proud of you, Mel. You deserve this harvest." And, "It's your season, girl. Get that bag." I took screenshots of every single one. If she wanted to broadcast her fraud to the world, I was happy to provide the archives. I dug further and found the guy in the suit. His name was Tyler, some ex-flame turned amateur real estate agent who looked like he'd spent more time at the tanning salon than in a law library. I found his brokerage, his license number, and his office address. If he was arrogant enough to go to contract without a title search, he was in for a brutal wake-up call. Now came the hardest part, the waiting. I didn't know how fast the legal freeze would hit. It could be days, it could be minutes. But I wasn't just going to sit back and twiddle my thumbs while she paraded through my parents' house. I called Mrs. Albright, the sweet, sharp-eyed woman in her mid-70s who lived across the street from my parents. She'd been my mom's gardening rival for 30 years, but she'd always had a soft spot for me because I'd fixed her printer back in 2018. "Oh, Owen," she chirped when she answered. "I haven't seen your car in the driveway for weeks. Are you still doing those computer magic tricks?" "I am, Mrs. Albright," I said with a chuckle. "Listen, I need a favor. A big one. Melody is trying to sell the house, but there's a legal dispute she's ignoring. Could you keep an eye on the front yard for me?" "I'll do better than that," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'll keep my binoculars by the window. I'll call you the second the circus starts." 2 days later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "The sign is up. Big white thing with balloons. Very tacky. Melody is out front with a fella in a jacket that's 2 sizes too small. I think he called her babe. People are starting to pull up." I felt a surge of adrenaline. I didn't go down there. I didn't want a shouting match on the lawn. I wanted her to have her moment. I wanted her to lead smug tours of the living room I'd maintained. I wanted her to feel like she was finally winning, because the higher she climbed, the harder the floor was going to feel when it vanished. Instead of a confrontation, I opened my laptop and drafted a very specific email to Tyler, the babe in the tight jacket. Subject: Urgent. Title dispute and pending litigation. 44 Sycamore Lane. Dear Mr. Pruitt, I am writing to formally notify you and your brokerage that the property located at 44 Sycamore Lane is currently the subject of an active title dispute and a lis pendens filing with the county clerk's office. As a primary stakeholder with unrecorded equitable interest and unreconciled familial equity, I have legally contested the deed transfer to Melody Miller. Proceeding with any sale, solicitation of offers, or execution of a purchase agreement while this dispute is pending is a violation of state real estate disclosure laws. Any attempt to transfer title will be blocked by the county, and your brokerage may be held liable for misrepresentation to potential buyers. The flag is active. Check your title report before you host another open house. Regards, Owen Miller. I hit send. Then, I leaned back in my new ergonomic chair, took a slow sip of coffee, and waited for the explosion. It was only a matter of time before manifesting met the cold, hard reality of the law. Would you like to see what happened when Tyler checked his inbox in the middle of the open house? I strongly recommended that Mr. Pruitt verify the status of the deed with the county clerk before proceeding with any further marketing, sale, or transfer of the property. I kept the language clinical and detached. Please consider this your formal notice of dispute. Any attempt to bypass this encumbrance will be met with immediate litigation. Sincerely, Owen Clark. No threats, no caps lock, no typical family drama, just the cold, hard facts of a legal blockade. Samir, my real estate law guru, approved the wording with a smirk I could practically hear through the phone, saying it was legally unshakable. I CC'd his firm on the email just to make sure the babe in the tight jacket knew exactly what kind of firepower was behind the screen. The fallout was instantaneous. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. I didn't need a caller ID to know the sender. "What are you doing?" I stared at the text for exactly 3 seconds before hitting delete. My pulse didn't even skip a beat. 2 hours later, a message from my mother's phone popped up. "Owen, please call me. Everything is falling apart. Please." I didn't call. I didn't text back. I sat in my quiet apartment sipping a perfectly brewed coffee and felt the absolute weight of the silence. This wasn't about rage anymore. Real revenge, the kind that leaves a permanent scar on someone's life, isn't about screaming into the void. It's about control. It's about being the one who decides when the game ends. I had the remote now, and I had just hit pause on Melody's entire life. The freeze triggered exactly as Samir predicted. The title company flagged the lis pendens, the sale was dead in the water, and Tyler the realtor was reportedly furious after being humiliated in front of potential buyers. Melody's little house of cards, built on a foundation of manifesting and aesthetic vibes, didn't just fall, it imploded. Underestimating the quiet one. While she was busy floating candles in mason jars and staging the master bedroom, I was performing a digital autopsy. I'm an IT consultant. I don't just browse the internet. I understand its memory. I remembered a shared Google Drive folder from 5 years ago, back when Melody was launching her holistic wellness coaching brand, the one that lasted exactly 3 weeks. She had begged me to set up her tech, and I had created a shared workspace for her documents. She must have assumed I'd long since deleted the link or forgotten my credentials. She was wrong. I recovered the Drive link from my archives and felt a surge of cold adrenaline as the folder opened. It was a graveyard of failed dreams and half-baked mood boards, but buried deep in a folder labeled confidential/taxes was the real gold. I found financial records she thought were long gone, Venmo receipts, bank statements, and more importantly, the documentation of her dirty little secret. One PDF caught my eye. It was a record of a $22,000 withdrawal from our parents' joint retirement account. The memo, written in my mother's shaky handwriting on a scanned note, read, "Temporary withdrawal from Melody's startup. To be repaid by Q4, private, not to be disclosed to Owen." That last part hit me like a bucket of ice water. Not to be disclosed to Owen. They had gutted their own retirement, the very money they told me they didn't have when I was paying for their groceries and heart medication, to fund Melody's Yoga Box subscription business, and they'd lied to my face about it for years. Worse, I found a follow-up note from 3 months later. Wrote off repayment. Melody says she is emotionally overwhelmed by the business failure. Will treat as a gift. She hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She had systematically drained our parents' remaining life savings while I was working 60-hour weeks to keep their lights on. She was a parasite in a designer sundress, and our parents were the willing hosts. I felt the final tether of guilt snap. I wasn't just done. I was dangerous. I called Samir, my voice sounding like it was coming from a different person, someone harder, colder. "Can we trigger a formal audit of the asset transfer?" I asked. "You mentioned the familial equity reconciliation. I want to fold in these undisclosed gifts as part of the estate offset." Samir whistled through his teeth, a sharp, long sound of realization. "Owen, if you can prove they were insolvent while giving her those gifts, and you were the one funding their survival, we aren't just talking about blocking a sale. We're talking about a court-ordered clawback. We could theoretically force the sale of the house to repay the estate and you for the unjust enrichment Melody received." "Do it," I said. "You realize this will leave Melody with nothing? The bank will take their cut for the reverse mortgage. The estate will have to settle your liens for the repairs you paid for, and she'll be lucky to walk away with a bus ticket." "I know," I replied, looking out the window at the sunset. "She wanted the house. I'm just making sure she gets the full experience of ownership, including the debt." "I'll start the paperwork," Samir said, his tone turning grimly professional. "But Owen, be ready. Once the court serves these papers, there's no going back to happy holidays at the Miller house." "That house was never happy," I said, and I hung up. I pulled out my phone, unblocked Melody's number for exactly 60 seconds, and sent a single screenshot of the "not to be disclosed to Owen" note. The typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. They were frantic, constant. I didn't wait to read the reply. I blocked her again, sat back, and watched the stars come out. The safety net was officially retired. It was time for everyone to learn how to fall. If you've got proof of that kind of financial favoritism, especially using retirement funds for one child while the other child subsidizes their life, it stops being a family matter and starts looking like coercive manipulation. In this jurisdiction, that's enough to file for a legal injunction to void the deed entirely based on a lack of equitable consideration. "Do it," I said, my voice as cold as a server room at midnight. Samir paused on the other end of the line, the silence heavy with the weight of what I was about to unleash. "Owen, you're sure? This is the point of no return. You're nuking the bridges and salting the earth." "I'm done playing nice, Samir. I've been the bridge for 5 years and they walked all over me until I buckled. It's time they see what happens when the safety net is gone." Over the next few weeks, we didn't just file paperwork. We built a fortress of evidence. We submitted everything: the $22,000 secret withdrawal, the $15,000 in structural repairs I'd paid for out of my own pocket, the invoices for their property taxes, the grocery receipts, and the text messages where my parents admitted they were hiding the will from me. We even included the screenshots of Melody's fraudulent Zillow listing and her Instagram posts boasting about new beginnings, on a property she hadn't yet inherited. When the legal notice finally hit her inbox and the physical papers were served at the front door I used to paint for free, the silence was absolute for 48 hours. It was the calm before the hurricane. Then, the storm hit with a ferocity that would have broken the old version of me. Mom called first, her voice a shrill, hysterical mess of gasping breaths. "Owen, what are you doing? Melody is an absolute wreck. She's locked herself in the guest room. She's crying. She's overwhelmed. She says you're trying to ruin her life. How could you be so cruel?" I didn't let the guilt penetrate. I stayed quiet until she ran out of breath. Then I spoke with a clinical, detached calm. "Mom, she tried to sell a house that wasn't legally hers. She drained your retirement savings while I was buying your heart medication. She blocked me out of a legacy I worked to maintain while she was in Austin failing at a bakery. This isn't revenge. It's a reality check." "She's your sister," Mom shrieked. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "She's a scam artist who finally got caught by the one person she thought would never fight back." Dad tried calling next. I watched his name flash on the screen and let it ring until the vibration stopped. Melody sent a barrage of texts from a burner number since her primary was still blocked. I only read the first one. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed everything. You always wanted to be the favorite. Congrats, you're the only one left." I muted the thread and went back to my work. 3 days later, Samir called with a smug chuckle. "She's folding, Owen. Her lawyer, some guy she probably found on a legal help subreddit, realized they're staring down the barrel of a fraud investigation. They're trying to negotiate. They want you to drop the suit if she agrees to a 50-50 split." "No," I replied. "No splits, no negotiations. We force her hand." Under the combined pressure of the title freeze, the looming audit of the retirement funds, and the threat of a full-scale civil trial, Melody broke. She officially signed the documents to relinquish the deed transfer. The county voided the pending handoff to her name, effectively stripping her of the gift she hadn't earned. But I wasn't finished. I pushed forward with a civil suit for restitution. I didn't want that house. It was tainted by decades of golden child worship. What I wanted was the $34,500 I had poured into that property under the false pretense that I was protecting a shared family asset. She had to liquidate the last of her wellness fund and sell off her designer gear just to settle the debt. The court also required her to issue a written statement acknowledging that she had misrepresented her ownership of the house during the attempted sale. That document is now a permanent matter of public record, a digital footprint that no amount of aesthetic rebranding can ever erase. The cherry on top? When Tyler, the real estate agent, found out she'd lied to him and nearly cost him his professional license, he went nuclear. He dropped her like a hot brick and sued her for his marketing fees and staging costs. No more citrus bowls. No more manifesting abundance in my parents' kitchen. The community fallout was just as swift. Mrs. Albright, bless her gossip-loving heart, didn't waste a single second. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Suddenly, Melody wasn't the successful influencer returning home. She was the girl who tried to swindle her own brother and got dragged through court for it. Her coaching page went dark. Her brand partners vanished. The hashtag blessed posts were replaced by a stony, embarrassing silence. My parents were forced to take out a high-interest mortgage on the house again just to cover their own living expenses and the legal fees they'd accrued defending Melody. They sent one final desperate email asking me to help them reorganize their finances. I didn't answer. I changed my phone number, updated my emergency contacts to a few close friends, and set a filter to send any email containing their names straight to the trash. I moved out of that city, took a high-paying remote contract, and finally started living a life that wasn't a safety net for people who didn't care if I fell. I wasn't the villain of this story. I was the wake-up call. And as I sat on a balcony overlooking a city where nobody knew my name or my reliability, I realized the final piece of revenge wasn't the money or the house. It was the fact that they could never take my peace of mind again. I was finally free. And for the first time in 34 years, the only person I was showing up for was me.
Thank you for staying with me until the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for my channel. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.